Time, a force, a motion, a paradox. Since time is a force of motion, you're probably wondering, how fast does time move? A lot of people would probably say, well, it moves forward by 1 second by 1 second. However, this is nonsensical and doesn't really provide any useful information whatsoever. I'm going to address this in one of my later videos, and I assure you that I'll be able to explain how time moves forward and how you can find out the force by which it moves forward. In this video, I want to briefly talk about the paradox where if the grandfather paradox is where you travel back in time and kill your grandfather. And if you killed your grandfather and you were never born, how could you travel back in time in the first place to kill your grandfather? I just want to, by having a complete linear timeline where there is a true time to the universe, and time is actually a force of motion pushing everything forwards, and it's also a consistent force that always reapplies itself, actually solves the grandfather paradox. In the original timeline, your grandfather is alive, he has your father, and then your father has you. This is a complete linear line of events moving forwards. Then somehow you go back in time to when your grandfather was born and then kill him. Logic would dictate that from that action forward, your father and yourself wouldn't have been born. But to get around this, I want to say that when you go back in time, time is actually reapplying itself, and the original timeline actually bends behind the new timeline, which means that the old timeline still exists, but it exists in the past. And since it's reinforcing the new timeline, you actually do exist to go back into time to kill your grandfather in the first place. What arises from this scenario is once you have killed your father and a new timeline is created, I think in the new timeline, your father and yourself would never have been created, but you would have been around to kill your father to kill your grandfather in the first place in the original timeline, which is now bended behind the new timeline. The paradox which now occurs is if you did manage to go back and kill your grandfather and the original timeline was behind the new timeline, would you still exist? I did state that you wouldn't be born and your father wouldn't have been born, but I think as a entity, the person with the knowledge that they obtained could still exist by the old timeline reinforcing the new one that you still exist. It's just that old knowledge and everyone who knew you wouldn't remember you. Or the other scenario is you go back and then you fade out into the distant memories of the universe. I would like to think, though, you would still exist. Using this method, the bending of time behind timelines, I believe it can solve every single time paradox. And I'm going to go through all of this in some of my next videos.